Hello historians, welcome to Decoding the Test and a quick look at the Cold War. Now there's obviously a ton to know about the Cold War that we're not going to go through today. If you want a great score, if you want to guarantee that high level, know the details that you see on the slide in front of you. Now today what we're going to look at is what the test has focused on over and over and over again. And for the Cold War, because it's a large percentage of the test, there are actually quite a few different areas it has focused on. It's focused on the economic boom caused by the GI Bill. It's focused on Vietnam and Korea. It's focused on executive power. It's focused on the containment and domino theory. And it's focused on detente. Today, though, we're going to look at crisis moments of the Cold War. The crisis moments that the test is asked about. Those moments of just high drama. And really, this is kind of odd. The test seems to ask its most direct questions in this category. When you compare it to every other category in every other era over the years, this category seems to just rack up those straight, direct questions. No maps, no graphs, anything like that. Just, hey, straight, direct question. What is this? Well, I've seen three crisis moments in particular. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the space race, and the Berlin airlift. So let's take a look at the questions. Right here you have Nikita Khrushchev writing a letter to President Kennedy in October of '62. And he's mentioning a quarantine. Now this should be a huge clue that they're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the Cuban Missile Crisis is the crisis moment that comes up again and again on the test. So you need to understand what it is. What is the Cuban Missile Crisis? The Soviet Union has placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, which is 90 miles from American shores. They've done that because Cuba is run by a communist dictator named Fidel Castro. Now we find the missiles through photographs taken by an U-2 overflight, a plane flying over Cuba. We have spotted these missiles being installed. They're not yet operational. For 13 days, President Kennedy, in October of '62, tries to deal with these Soviet missiles in Cuba with the ultimate goal that they can't stay. The most significant act he takes is he blockades Cuba, or he quarantines Cuba. He has the Navy surround Cuba and he won't let anything get into Cuba. That prevents any more missiles from getting in, doesn't do anything about the missiles that are already there. The missiles that are already there, eventually a deal is made. America agreed not to invade Cuba or destabilize Castro, and the Soviet Union agreed to remove the missiles. Sometimes later, we also agreed to remove our own nuclear missiles from Turkey. Turns out, we just really didn't need them anymore. We had nuclear submarines that could strike the Soviet Union just as easily. So it was a little bit of a trade-off. What you see here is Khrushchev telling Kennedy, you shouldn't blockade Cuba. You should not quarantine Cuba. So what is this talking about? Answer choice G, establishing a naval blockade stopped the shipment of missiles to Cuba. You're going to see the Cuban Missile Crisis again. For instance, here's another one. President Kennedy responded to reports that the Soviet Union was constructing missile sites in Cuba by doing what? A, ordering a naval blockade of Cuba. So what do you notice? If it's about the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's probably going to be talking about the blockade or quarantine of Cuba. Could be either word, and you need to know that they're interchangeable. All right, what else? Well, here you have a question on the Berlin airlift. What's a Berlin airlift? Well, Berlin, at the time, was divided up east and west. West Berlin was surrounded by East Germany, which was a communist nation. This had all been done right after World War II, when Germany and Berlin had been divided up between the winning powers, and eventually divided up between democratic capitalist forces supporting of the United States and communist forces supporting the Soviet Union. East Germany was communist. The problem is Berlin smack dab in the middle of East Germany. So the only way for the people of West Germany, the capitalist democratic side of, the only way for the people of West Berlin, the capitalist democratic side of Berlin, to get to West Germany or anywhere outside of communism was a couple of highways. Well, in the 40s, the Soviet Union cut those highways off because it wanted all of Berlin. What did we do? We flew over Berlin and we dropped supplies to keep the people of Berlin fed. We call it the Berlin Airlift. It lasted for more than a year and basically made the Soviet Union kind of withdraw. They stepped back from the brink. So here it's A, we bypassed a Soviet blockade without provoking a military conflict. We did not threaten them. Instead, we just kept the people of Germany alive. We kept them from starving, and that kind of diffused the situation. Finally, you get a question about Sputnik. What's a direct result of Sputnik? And you're like, what is Sputnik? Sputnik is the first human-made satellite put into space, and it was put into space by the Soviet Union. When it launches in '57, it is a wake-up call to Americans that the Soviets are getting ahead of us in getting to space. So what happens? It kicked off what we call the space race. Answer choice B talks about the U.S. government founding a federal agency dedicated to space exploration. That's called NASA. NASA was founded after Sputnik was launched to basically house all the minds, all the innovation to push the U.S. past the Soviet Union into space and eventually to the moon. So what do we see again? Let's sum up. We're seeing the crisis moments of the Cold War, and three in particular. The Cuban Missile Crisis, in which you pretty much need to know that we responded to Soviet missiles in Cuba by blockading or quarantining Cuba. The Berlin Airlift, which we diffused without getting into a fight by flying over Berlin and dropping supplies. And then what happens when Sputnik was launched? Well, it launched the space race. We founded NASA so we could push ahead. If there are no questions, comments, or screams of angst, I will see you in the next video.